Okay. Um, if everyone could mute themselves, that would be great. Jen, did you have
Just
something?
quickly, because I have to get off early, I want everyone to know that on Monday morning, I guess, Tuesday morning, Matt Coda was on the same radio show that you were on with him, and they asked him about the slam, and he's on every week or every month to talk about legislative issues, and he gave a great recap of the slam and enthusiasm, and so we got a lot of good publicity for about, I would say, 5 to 8 minutes on Monday morning. So I wanted you all to know that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I got lots of great feedback about the slam. So, and a lot of people are already asking me about next year. So, um, very exciting. Um, okay, so we have a speaker, but I don't have a bio for you, Sarah. So all I know about Sarah is that she is very flexible for showing up on Zoom instead of in person this morning. And we are really grateful for Sarah Lemnah to be here. She's from the Vermont chapter of the American Red Cross. And if you want to tell us a little more about yourself, I usually read a bio for our speaker, but I did not get anything. So I'm sorry.
That's totally fine. Thank you so much for having me today. So as Elizabeth said, I am the Executive Director of the American Red Cross here in Vermont. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director of the Cancer Patient Support Foundation, which is based right in Williston, provides financial aid for cancer patients. And prior to that, I was with the Area Agency on Aging, AgeWell, as their Communication Development Director. So I've been in the nonprofit world for about 20 years in Vermont. So I'm dating myself a little. But now I'm with the Red Cross, really excited to be so. Been here 16 months, and thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share a little PowerPoint. It will keep me on task so I don't meander too much, but please feel free to jump in, take yourself off mute because I may not see a hand, and ask any questions as we go. And then hopefully at the end we have time for some questions too. I did also want to point out that one of your members is a board member of the Red Cross, Erin Pond, who's been an amazing new member, and we're really excited to have her. And I will make a pitch at the end, but if anybody wants to find out more about being a board member, please talk to Erin or I. We'd love to expand our group. So I think most people have heard of the Red Cross. We're pretty well known, but I think there's a lot of things about the Red Cross you probably don't know. Our mission is to alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies. And we have an amazing group of volunteers and donors that make that possible. We receive no federal or state funding. We are all privately funded by donors and foundations. And 90% of our workforce is volunteers. So when you see a Red Crosser in action, most of the time they're a volunteer, not a paid staffer. So that's pretty amazing. Except for blood drives. Those are staffers that are putting needles in your arms. We don't do volunteers for that. But the entire state of Vermont, we only have 69 employees. Most of those are at the blood drives. So Vermont is part of the Northern New England region, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. So there are 7 chapters in that region. Vermont is one chapter. Our chapter covers the entire state. But our region supports over 3 million people. And it only has 50 employees for that whole 3-state region. So we're in our humanitarian side, not counting blood services. So we are lean and mean, definitely. We have a lot of lines of service. Some of them are pretty well known. So our biomedical is our blood drives. We have blood drives out in the community that you see, including one coming up in Williston on March 29th at the Community Crosspoint Church. I would encourage people to go online, redcross.org, and see if there's an appointment. We'd love to have as many people as possible, but we do over 1,000 blood drives in Vermont a year. We also have a fixed site here in Burlington that does blood and platelet donations, and I'll talk more about that later. And then, of course, we do have labs that test the blood and looks for rare blood types and make sure that the blood is safe to be used. Training services, we'll talk about more later, but that's really certifying businesses, individuals. It could be lifeguard training, it could be CPR. And then our humanitarian services, which I'm deeply involved with. It's our disaster services, it's our services of the armed forces, and our international services. So I'll go a little bit about that. And if I'm going too fast, or if you have any questions, please just jump in. So blood services, near and dear to my heart, because my aunt is alive because she received platelets. She is a cancer patient. So it's always emotional when I walk into the donor center and see people giving platelets every day. But every 2 seconds in the United States, someone needs blood. 40% of the nation's blood supply comes from the American Red Cross. We're the single largest blood supplier to the nation. And when you think about blood needs, it's complicated. One car accident, someone might need 100 units of blood. So just think about how many donors it takes to keep up with that demand. Blood has a shelf life, it's only good for 42 days. So we have that tricky, tricky balance. We want to make sure we meet the blood needs, so we gather as much blood as we can. But at the same time, we never want blood to expire. So the Red Cross has an amazing system to ship blood wherever it's needed. For example, I gave blood a few weeks ago. My blood was used in California. So when that blood starts to age out, once we haven't used it in the first week or two, they start looking for opportunities to ship it where it's needed, because we never want blood not to be used. So there's a really amazing logistical system that they have to make sure the needs are met. So it's a pretty incredible group of people that work there.
Sarah, how much blood is in a unit?
A pint.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that question. And then training services. So this is a group that we don't talk about a whole lot. It's actually when people certify people. So maybe you have people who want to be a lifeguard, or they want to have a babysitting class, or they want to know first aid or CPR, or how to use a defibrillator. You can actually go and take these trainings and get certified. And that's something the Red Cross has been doing almost from the very beginning of its inception. We also have an amazing Red Cross series of apps. And once you get in there, it's pretty addicting because there's so many. Like the one that I love is first aid for your pet, because having something handy, if something happens, you don't think about that. But, there's all sorts of things from, if you're bit by something, if you have a burn, if you have a cut, like every imaginable first aid question you might have is on these apps. So it's a really great way to have kind of easy access to information. Especially when, doing an emergency and you're stressed out, you don't really have time to look for something. So having it at your ready is a great kind of tool to have. So that's something the Red Cross is really developing, a lot of those easy, reachable information. Disaster services, unfortunately, Vermont has seen a lot of that recently. The last 2 years, we've had 100-year floods. We are hoping this July we do not have another flood. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes when we have these floods that probably a lot of people don't realize the Red Cross is doing. So some of the stuff that we do is provide financial aid for people who are directly impacted. And a lot of families in the last few years during the floods and doing home fires suddenly find themselves needing lodging, housing, food, rent assistance, and unfortunately, funeral assistance. We've had a number of fatal fires this year in Vermont. So we've been helping a lot with funeral needs of families, which is particularly emotional for our volunteers to meet with these families and help them through that process. But some of the things you don't think about when you have a flood or a fire is like replacing medications. We all know when you work with insurance companies, it can be challenging. And if you've just filled your prescription and suddenly you call and say you need them refilled, it can be hurdles. It can be hurdles in place. So our case managers who are volunteers are really good about helping to make sure you can get those eyewear prescriptions refilled, make sure you get your medical prescriptions refilled, connect you to long-term groups because we'll help you through that initial disaster and on your road to recovery. But recovery can take months, if not years. And so we work very closely with all of our community partners and member agencies of 211 to kind of make sure people are getting the most benefit they can. And also services to the armed forces. So if you're a member of the military, you've gone through a disaster like a home fire or a flood, there are certain assistance programs that are also eligible for them that we can connect them to. And we've seen a lot of large scale disasters. So I don't like to brag, but I will brag about this. So last summer we had a flood and it was horrible and a lot of families were impacted. And we knew it was going to be bad. So we pre-deployed volunteers, we pre-deployed equipment and supplies. And when the governor said that we needed a shelter, we were able to open in 5 minutes. So we were incredibly proud that it only took us 5 minutes to activate and be open to receive residents at the shelter. We had a trailer park that flooded. It was mainly elderly individuals that needed some immediate special care. So we were really proud that we were able to give that to them. We work with state emergency managers. We actually assess homes for damage. So we assessed over 500 homes last summer. to see their level of damage, if it was something that was going to be salvageable. There's a FEMA ranking system that we can help to access more funding for people, so we're able to access that. And then we also worked with resource centers. We actually had all of our community partners come together to make sure everybody in the community knew what services they could get. So we worked very closely with that. And we had a lot of mobile feeding. So during a disaster, you might see a Red Cross van driving around a lot. And what they're doing is delivering hot food. So we had a team that would leave Barry, and they would drive up through Plainfield into St. Johnsbury, into Lyndonville, into Newport, and back down. They did that for 3 meals every day. So it was like 30,000 meals that were delivered. So it's an amazing feat to see that kind of in action, that team atmosphere of cooking the food, getting it out there, working with community partners and distributing it. So it's a huge process, but it's something that people need during disasters. It's really hard to get hot food to people. And then dropping off emergency supplies. So we drop off cleanup kits, and you might think a cleanup kit might be some sponges and some cleaning fluid and some gloves. It's not. It's shovels, it's rakes, it's total hazmat suits. Because if you're crawling through a basement, they got mildew and mold. It's stuff for your face. It's goggles. It's everything you can imagine. And we handed out hundreds and hundreds of units of those cleanup kits throughout the state. And so we were going around dropping those off at town centers and doing community events. Ben and Jerry's was gracious enough to tour with us, so people would come get their supplies and get free ice cream. I think they were more excited by the ice cream, but we were all happy to be there. So we have some great community partners that support it. But the Red Cross is in it for the long haul. We want to prepare people before a disaster, respond during a disaster, and help them in that recovery phase after a disaster. And a disaster could be anything. It could be a flood. It could be, other areas. We see hurricanes and tornadoes, but home fires is the #1 disaster we respond to. And home fires is why I work with the Red Cross. When I was 13, my home burned down. And me and my sister had just got home from school, and we were doing our homework, and we lived in a duplex, and our neighbor took a tea kettle, was on fire, and threw it down the stairwell in between the two homes. And it was an old farmhouse. It was gone in less than 2 minutes. So I grabbed the photo album. My sister grabbed the dog, and that was it. And the next day, the Red Cross knocked at the door and handed out gift certificates to Ames department store. I'll date myself, and some other little goodies. But I could go and get school clothes in a backpack, and the next day I could go to school. So it was kind of the first day of a new normal. And that stayed with me through my whole life, about these volunteers who are going out in the middle of the night, making sure people's needs were met, and letting us know if you needed someone to talk to, you need help, to call them, and would call back and check in. How are you doing? What do you need? So an amazing group of volunteer partners that we have. And we also work closely with our community partners, referring them to 211 and other area agencies to help them make sure they get the most benefit that they can. Community preparedness and education. So this is probably not something we talk about as much, but you'll be hearing more and more about it. We have a renewed focus to really get people kind of educated on what they can do to make themselves prepared. During a disaster, oftentimes it takes a day or two for people to get to individuals. If you are cut off by a flood, or if there's a mass casualty incident, or if there's something going on. Last year we had flooding through the central part of the state. We couldn't be in all places at all times, neither could the state. It does take FEMA a few days to get in place. So there's always that period where we want people to be ready. So as much as to take care of yourself and your family and your friends, the better. One of our programs is a home fire campaign. We actually install free smoke alarms and teach people some fire prevention. And we're doing a series of these installations this year. We actually are working on an event right now in the Northeast Kingdom. Then we have one in Franklin County, and we're working our way south. So if you know of anybody that needs a smoke alarm or would like more information, you can go to our website, redcross.org, and just put yourself on the list. And it's a great thing. I think a lot of people assume the smoke alarm, I hit the button, it beeps, it's fine. That's not necessarily true. After 10 years, those smoke alarms are not reliable because dust and grease gets in them. So after 10 years, even if you hit the button and they beep, they need to be replaced because they're just not sensitive enough. So that's something that most people don't know. I did not know. I will not say how old my smoke alarm was when I started the Red Cross, but it was longer than 10 years, and I have since replaced it. Be Red Cross Ready is another program that we have that helps individuals kind of prepare to know what to have on hand, water, shelf-stable food, a radio, prescriptions. How many of us have waited to like the last day to refill a prescription? But if a disaster would have struck, you would be without those. So making sure you have 3 to 5 days of prescriptions on hand. Make sure you have pet food. All the things we don't necessarily think about that we plan for when we're kids in elementary school doing our fire drills that we really need to do as we're adults to make sure we know what the plan is. Heartbreakingly, we have families sometimes that will lose a family member because everybody got out of the house during a home fire, but somebody thought somebody was still in the house and they go back in looking for someone because one person's on one side of the house, another person on the other side of the house. So one of the things that we talk about in Be Red Cross Ready is have a meeting place. So like it's the front tree or it's the back shed or it's a neighbor's house. Because otherwise sometimes we've had fatal fires from people who already had gotten out of the house and went back in. We also have a program called Ready Rating, which is great for organizations and businesses. It's a really easy online web tool where you can kind of see where your business ranks as far as readiness for a disaster. Gives you some tools and tips about how to improve, and then you can retake the test and see if you're better. So it's a really easy way to kind of just make sure everybody is ready. A lot of businesses in Vermont, we saw that in Montpelier, are along the river. And you have to be especially vigilant to make sure you're prepared for your staff safety and for the building's integrity. And then youth preparedness. We have one that's preparedness with Pedro. He's an adorable little penguin. He's for our kindergarten through second graders. And then we have our pillowcase project for older kids. But it's trying to teach kids kind of the basics in a fun, non-scary way about things they can do and how they can prepare. And also we know that kids will go home and talk to their families about it. Kids are great about getting their parents excited and invested in doing a program. So it's a way to get to them early and give them some basic tips and hopefully draw their family into wanting to be better prepared. Climate has become an increasingly huge focus of the Red Cross. And I think when people think about climate, they don't think about the Red Cross. But we are very invested in this space because as you can see from this picture, which was Hurricane Helene from last fall, we are dealing with climate every day. So the storms are coming more often, they're coming stronger, they're causing more damage. And the Red Cross is building capacity to meet that need. But it is a challenge. Right now, we have Vermonters in LA working with the wildfire victims. We still have Vermonters in the Carolinas. We still have Vermonters who are in Hawaii, and those wildfires were a few years ago. Recovery takes a long process, and our dedicated volunteers are all over the country trying to make sure the needs are met. So just to give you some stats, to give you some perspective. So in the last 10 years, there's been a 70% increase in billion-dollar disasters. And I did say billion with a B. 8.5 million Americans have been displaced in the last 10 years due to storms. There have been more Category 4 and 5 hurricanes that made landfall in the last 5 years than the last 50 years combined. And we have twice as many major disasters now as we did a decade ago. So the Red Cross, along with our partners, are really focused on trying to meet the need. But it is growing at a really fast rate. And so we are definitely taxing our volunteers. These are all the disasters from last year. You'll see 3 are in northern New England. And the number 1 there was the flood there in Vermont. Vermont was not known as a disaster area. So when we meet with our partner chapters across the country, they are shocked that Vermont keeps popping up with disasters because we think about disasters in Florida. We think about disasters, in Oklahoma with tornadoes. We don't think about disasters in northern New England, but we are increasingly becoming a normal place for a disaster. So we're always looking to grow our workforce. Our volunteers are highly trained. They're very dedicated. They're an amazing group, and we're so lucky to have them. We're always looking for more members. And they really are the heart and soul of the Red Cross. It's amazing to see them getting up at 2 in the morning and rushing out. We had a gentleman last summer, who was working on the flood. He lives in Stowe. He was helping us in Barry. He was getting calls from his wife, which we didn't think anything of. And then he explained, well, his wife was annoyed because they were flooded. Their road was washed out, but he left to help others. And she's kind of like, when are you coming back? So they're a hardcore dedicated group and do amazing, amazing work. And then services the armed forces. We take this as a very sacred duty. We were founded on the battlefields of the Civil War. So serving the armed forces was our first program when Claire Barton founded the organization. and is still the core of who we are today. You know, one of the programs that are probably the most known is emergency communication. So if you have a loved one who's deployed overseas and there's an emergency back home, we would be the one to communicate that information to them. For example, my uncle passed away at the time my cousin was deployed in Afghanistan. It was the Red Cross that communicated with him and helped him get back here for the funeral. So that's something that's an important piece of who we are and our support of the military. But it's not just when people are deployed. We're also providing financial assistance to families when people are deployed and to veterans when they return. It could be rent, it could be food, it could be whatever the family needs. So that's something that our caseworkers work very closely to make sure that military members and veterans are supported. We also help people deploy. We have programs to help workshops to help families and military members face their first deployment and what to expect. We have resiliency workshops when they get back. We have financial aid when they get back. We have networking, so veterans can talk to each other and kind of share those experiences. And we help the families of all military members also to make sure they're getting the emotional support they need and the financial support they need. So our services to the military is something that's very important to us. And then probably the least known program is our international services. We work with our Red Cross partners and Red Crescent partners around the world. In most instances, it's during a natural disaster. Say there's an earthquake in Nepal and we have a resident who lives here as a family member back in Nepal. We would reach out to our partners to see if that family member was still alive and connect them. So that's something our International Services Department does. But another thing that we do around the world, not so much here in the United States, is vaccinations for measles and rubella, with a 73% reduction in measles. And I know the Rotary is very invested in the vaccination space. So you know how vitally important it is to make sure that people are vaccinated. So that's something we're quite proud of. To give you a little snapshot of Northern New England, we respond to over 1,200 disasters. We've helped 3,400 service members, trained more than 21,000 people, and collected over 132,000 pints of blood. So that's a lot of blood, and installed more than 1,900 smoke alarms. But I always, you know, we're Vermonters. I always get intrigued by Vermont's numbers, and it's pretty impressive. We respond to 465 disasters, helping nearly 975 Vermonters in this past year, and provide over 500 services to military veterans and their families in the past year, collected more than 31,000 blood products, and held more than 1,100 blood drives. We have 2 people booking those blood drives and supporting those blood drives. It's pretty amazing. They're in every community across the state, and they do an amazing job. Trained more than 4,800 people in CPR, and installed nearly 400 free smoke alarms. And we have a major installation coming up this spring, so that number is going to be drastically higher, but making sure that people are safe. A working smoke alarm reduces your risk of death by 50% in a home fire. So it is critically important to have. And support over 280 active volunteers. We have way more than that. Those are the ones who actually want to go into the computer system and log their hours. Most people do not like having to do that. They'd rather just go and volunteer and help people. So if 280 people have gone into the system and logged their hours, we probably have another 50 to 75 people who did not log their hours on top of that. And, you know, I'd love to answer questions, but also if you want to know how to help the Red Cross, we always need blood, and we always need volunteers, and we always need board members. Erin has been an amazing board member. She can tell you about her experience, but we really want people in the community who kind of know their community, represent their community, and kind of have their voices heard at the table, to make sure that we're getting the services to the right places, to the right people, in the right way, and be respectful of our communities that we serve. But that's kind of a brief snapshot. I know I threw a lot at you. I've been with the Red Cross for 60 months. I'm still learning things that we do. So it's a huge mammoth organization, but we are embedded in every community in Vermont. And like I said, we're based out of Burlington, but we are everywhere that we need to be. And we are where our volunteers and our clients are. And I'm very honored to be here today, and would love to answer any questions you might have. Yes.
So a question regarding early in your presentation, you mentioned that you don't take federal funds, I believe you said.
We're not federally or state funded, no.
So where does your, I mean, what does your fundraising look like? Where do you get the funds?
Most of our funds are from private foundation, individual donors. We don't really do many events. It is really working with our donors. So we have 5 people throughout Northern New England who work with our donors. And we have many very generous people in our community that contribute to our budget to make it happen. So it's all privately funded from individual donors in the region.
Thank you.
Yes. Leslie.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Leslie and Murray.
Armin here. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for telling us about the tragedy that you endured at 13. That must have been pretty horrific for you. Also, just a short story. When I joined the military, we were briefed on the services that the Red Cross offers to veterans, and it was a very good feeling knowing that we had an advocate if we needed, if something happened back home, that you would advocate for us and so forth. So really appreciate the Red Cross, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much. And we talked about advocating. I didn't really get into if somebody in the military, they come back, they're a veteran, they're filing a claim with the VA, that can be complicated. There's a lot of paperwork. We do assist with that. And if there's a denial or there's an issue, we do advocate with the VA to make sure the person receives services. So we are on the side of members to make sure they get whatever they're due. Anybody else? I encourage you all to go to redcross.org or call 1-800-RED-CROSS. There's a wealth of information there, and it's just kind of cool to look around. Even the history is kind of interesting to see, going back to 1881. So I do encourage you to go to their website and just kind of see there's a lot going on locally and a lot going on nationally. And I'm really proud of our Vermonters here at home that are doing the good work, and also those that have decided to deploy for 2 weeks to help our neighbors around the country. An amazing group.
Yeah, I did have a question,
Yes.
actually. Yeah, thank you so much. It's really amazing the amount of different things that you folks do, and it's really so important. But thinking about blood donations specifically, I know in years past there have been a lot of restrictions on certain groups of people for giving blood, and I just wondered how those have changed recently.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So the FDA regulates who can give blood. So we do follow FDA regulations. So the Red Cross for years have advocated that the FDA guidance was outdated. So finally, a couple years ago, they did change some of the restrictions. So 2 of the restrictions that were most impactful on people was, one was that there was some restrictions against gay men. Couldn't donate. And that changed and evolved over the years. Currently, it is not about what your orientation is, it's about your activity. So if someone has had, for the last 3 months has had various partners, it's not really indicative of who your partners are. But if you had a lot of unprotected partners over the last 3 months, we would ask somebody to wait 3 months. So it's not directed at a group, it's directed at an activity. So that is something that the FDA has changed so that people can give blood. So most people can give blood. Another change is that a lot of people who have lived overseas or been deployed overseas couldn't give because of mad cow disease, and there was concern about it getting in the bloodstream. That has since changed. I can't tell you what the criteria is because it's very individual. Now you go through a screening, where you lived, how long it was, how long you've been back. So most people can donate. It's very rare that someone's denied for either of those 2 instances anymore. That has been updated. It still gets updated. So I would say you should always contact, schedule, and go through the screening. But most people can. And I know a lot of people were really upset that they weren't able to donate in the past. And unfortunately, that was an FDA guidance that we spent 20 years trying to overturn. We test for about 15 diseases. One of them was HIV. That's why we pressed the FDA to make that change, because it was not something that really was an issue, because that is a disease that we screen for. But we do work under FDA guidance, and thankfully they have listened to us and our partners and started to be open to let more people donate, because they were not scientifically based. And now most people can donate. Usually the ones that are denied now is because they're anemic or they have something personally going on that day. We do test to make sure that their blood levels are good because we don't want someone to give blood and make themselves sick. So usually most of our denials now are because someone came in and they were anemic. So please have breakfast and be hydrated when you come in, people. But most people do give. So that's excellent. And most people are not deferred.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Any other?
I'm gonna just say that I did just download the pet first aid app. So I'm happy to know that this is even out there.
I know, isn't that cool? I love that.
It is. I'm excited to go through it.
Yeah, we all love our pets, but we don't think that there's like an easy app to make sure they're okay and to take care of them. I know like now when you take your dog out for a walk, it's all the salt and the sand and everything getting in their paws and stuff, and knowing just those simple things to make sure they're safe, besides the adorable boots, what I just love. But is an amazing thing. So yeah, I love that app.
Yeah, so thanks.
Any other? Yes.
Not a question. I just really want to thank you so much for pivoting and coming in on Zoom like this and giving us such a wonderful presentation. And thank you to you and all the volunteers.
Well,
Very
thank you. It's
appreciated.
my honor. It's my honor. Thank you so much.
And
And
thanks to Erin. Erin, that's just one more thing I just didn't know about you. You're so impressive.
Sarah, thank you for joining us. I have been really surprised and pleasantly surprised with how much Red Cross does that I never knew. So I'm really glad that Sarah was able to be a speaker and share with us all the wonderful things that we're doing and that Vermonters are doing for their communities. It's just awesome. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Erin. Excited to have her on the board.
any other questions?
I have one.
Okay.
It's not so much a question, but I know one of the services that we did after 9/11 was we recruited and trained a lot of medical personnel, like psychologists and social workers and whatever. And we sent them down to both Washington, D.C. and in New York, working with the first responders there because they were having such a really difficult time. And that was something that we hadn't really done a whole lot of that before, but because it was so immense with the disaster, we had to do that. And then we actually, when they came back, kind of deprogrammed them and got information from them as to the things they felt were most important and what we could do. So I think with a lot of the disasters like the fires out in California, you have so many people and the psychological part of it is so hard. So I'm assuming that we're still doing that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So we do mental health and spiritual healing. So during a disaster, both people who have experienced a disaster, the volunteers who've helped the people who've experienced the disasters, and the first responders all go through that trauma. So part of our program is doing the mental health aspect to make sure people are getting what they need to get through that. Unfortunately, Northern New England was a location of a mass casualty incident in Lewiston, Maine, a year and a half ago, where there was a shooting where a number of people were killed, including children. And it required a lot of our mental health volunteers to provide that support. We actually had some staff that had to take a leave because it was just too challenging working with grieving families for weeks on end through that process. So we're very aware of the mental health impact, and we work closely with the Medical Reserve Corps, which is focused on mental health and disasters also. That was founded after 9/11 because that is a key component. And, one of the things that we do in supporting our first responders is not only that mental health aspect, it's even when you see a large fire, you might see a Red Cross van. We're handing out like hot coffee and food. We're evaluating their mental health to see if they need someone to talk to. So we're also supporting our first responders doing these disasters because it takes a toll. And thank you for what you've done.
All right. Is that everyone? Thank you so much, Sarah. I had no idea how extensive Red Cross services were. Gave me a lot to think about. In gratitude for you coming today, we will make a donation to the Williston Central School Mentoring Program in your name.
Nice. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think you are a great speaker and that we would probably love to have you back sometime because there sounds like a lot more to learn. So yes, thank you for being.
I'm available anytime you would like to chat about something, so I would love to come back.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank
And you are welcome to stick around. We have someone's going to tell us a story, and then we will have a little bit of time where we talk about our week. And so you can stay or you can go, whatever you please. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you so very much.
All right, Marty, are you ready? So Marty asked if he could tell his story that he was planning to tell at the Story Slam and didn't get to. So rather than our usual inspiration, Marty is going to tell us his story. So it's all yours, Marty.
Can you hear me all right?
You're a little quiet. That's better. Yeah, a little closer is better.
All right. Yeah,
All good?
so
Everyone can hear him?
I apologize for that little event that I had on Saturday. I'm fine, and we've almost got it figured out. I hope to have it figured out within the next day or two. So the story I was going to tell, I titled "An Interesting Case of a Magic Disappearance." And it's a story about quantum physics, so don't immediately go to sleep. But quantum physics is profoundly weird and profoundly important. As you know, I'm not a physicist, but I really enjoy reading books for non-physicists about this stuff. So this means you can ask me any question you like, but you cannot expect a correct answer. So in other words, cut me some slack on this. So I want to talk about a phenomenon in quantum physics, and this actually applies to the story eventually, called quantum entanglement. So one of the basic principles of quantum physics is that subatomic particles, as most of you probably know, that there are multiple subatomic particles. The first ones that were discovered were electrons, protons, and neutrons, and now there's a long list of these particles. And the concept underlying quantum physics is that these particles can exist in two quantum states, two different states. For example, electrons can display spin, and they can have what's called up or down spin, and there's a certain probability that either spin direction will be detected at any time. Quantum entanglement, and here's sort of the core of this, is present when a change in a quantum property of a given particle, such as the spin direction of an electron, is associated with a simultaneous change in the same property of a distant particle of the same type. So you've got two electrons, one is located here and one is located there. It could be a tiny distance or it could be a big distance, but when you change the behavior of one, the other particle shows the same simultaneous change. That is, the two particles are entangled. Somehow or other, they are exchanging information, despite the fact that to our human brains, it doesn't seem possible that could occur. That's one of the underlying principles. And again, quantum entanglement is the notion that two particles can somehow exchange information at a distance, even though there's no reason to think that they are related. If that sounds weird, well, it is. So no one knows how quantum entanglement occurs, but it has been documented repeatedly. It was discovered by Albert Einstein and two colleagues in the mid-1930s. They wrote a very famous paper on this. Einstein called the phenomenon of quantum entanglement, quote, spooky action at a distance, unquote. However, Einstein was never comfortable with observations or concepts that did not make common sense to him, and it certainly doesn't to me. Thus, while he was one of the first to describe quantum entanglement, he never fully trusted its existence and spent decades trying to disprove the validity of his own observation. Okay, that's the background. So let's now go to the 1960s TV series Star Trek. And you may remember, if you watch Star Trek, I was never a big Trekkie, but a lot of people are. There's a phenomenon whereby a cast member is transferred instantaneously to a distant site by uttering the magic words, "Beam me up, Scotty." Was this an unwitting extension of quantum entanglement to large-scale objects by the show's writers? We don't know, but the popular science term for this phenomenon is teleportation. Now let's move forward again in time once more to October 2022. Barbara and I spent several days in Boston at a hotel near Boston Medical Center at that time. On the third and last day of our stay, we had an early lunch at a hospital snack bar. Both of us recollect that I had my wallet with me at lunch and that I used a credit card to pay. That evening, we met my daughter and son-in-law, who lived nearby, for dinner. My intention was to pay for dinner, but when I checked my pocket for my wallet, it wasn't there. My son-in-law was kind enough to pay. Careful searches of our luggage, our car, and hotel room failed to turn up the wallet. Calls to the hospital snack bar, as well as its lost and found office, were not productive. Results were also negative at our hotel's lost and found, as well as every other place we visited during our stay after that fateful lunch. We were frustrated that we could not find the wallet, but decided we had no choice but to return home the following morning as planned. I, of course, reported my credit cards lost and went through all the other things one has to do when one loses a wallet. I also bought a new wallet. Fast forward once more to a Saturday morning about 4 months later, at which point I had pretty much forgotten the whole missing wallet incident. We had arranged for a member of Williston's Best Buy Geek Squad to come to our home to help with the installation of a new electronic device in our basement. When the Geek Squad guy was done, I asked him how he would like to be paid, and he produced a handheld credit card reader. I excused myself to go back down to the basement where I had left my new wallet. When I reappeared on the first floor, I pulled out a credit card from the wallet to pay for the service call. It was rejected twice. The same thing happened with an alternate credit card. It was at that point I realized that the wallet I brought up from the basement was slightly lighter in color and slimmer than my new wallet. It was indeed the wallet I had lost in Boston. To this day, I have no idea how that wallet was lost or how it was found, but ever since I have struggled with the question, was this teleportation or just a garden variety magic trick? More fundamentally, is some supernatural force just playing with me? I can assure you, however, it was not a convoluted way to get my son-in-law to pay for dinner. Story.
Thanks, Marty. I'm glad we finally got to hear your story.
Wow. Great
Very-
story. It probably would have won one of the awards at the Story Slam.
Think?
May I say something too, not regard to Marty's story, but to something else?
Yes, you may.
So if anybody wants to give him feedback, that would be great. But meanwhile, I wanted to update the club on something that we were able to put together. A few months ago, I believe it was Vince and Sherry and Elizabeth contacted me about a request from some young lady named Grace Gray, because she wanted to do her master's degree in sustainable food studies at American University in Rome. She wrote a beautiful letter to the various Rotaries, and I was able to, remembering that years ago, we assisted a young woman named Rachel Jolly in a sustainable scholarship. I contacted Marilyn Bedell, and she brilliantly put together several clubs, and this will fund Grace's scholarship of $30,000. So I just wanted the club to be aware that working together with various clubs, we can do things like that. Marilyn ends her note to us saying, if the Williston-Richmond and Essex clubs are prepared to make a donation for this scholarship, I'd ask that you consider making a donation to the annual program fund share this year, as the money will be available to us in 3 years to do other global grants and district grants. So I'd like the club to consider that and to recognize that we're able to help others. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking that on, Barb. And that's amazing that she got her scholarship. Most of you probably remember Grace. She came to speak to us. Very compelling.
Present to us when she finishes.
Oh, she's going to come back. Wonderful.
No. She's waiting for, she's going to start the program probably in January 2026.
Okay.
So when she finishes her program, we can invite her as a speaker.
Yes, that would be wonderful. We'd love to hear what that scholarship did. And I didn't realize how in depth you went with that, and I really appreciate all the work you did to get her that scholarship and working with lots of other clubs from, it sounds like, all over the place. So thank you. All right. We don't have Chris here to tell us jokes and run the